Let's dive into the story of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th U.S. president. Now, he wasn't just a leader. He was a man who inherited a nation that was literally tearing itself apart and somehow, against all odds, managed to reshape its very soul.
You've probably heard this quote before, spoken years before he even became president. This wasn't just some clever phrase. It was a chillingly accurate prophecy of the crisis that was about to completely engulf America. It really does set the stage for everything that followed.
So, to really understand Lincoln, you first have to understand the firestorm he was about to walk into. See, America in the 1850s wasn't a united country at all. It was a nation dangerously, deeply fractured over the issue of slavery.
That fragile peace was just shattered by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Now, the idea, it sounded democratic enough, right? Popular sovereignty, let the new settlers vote on it themselves. But in practice, it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery groups flooded into Kansas, which led to this brutal preview of the Civil War we now call Bleeding Kansas. The center just could not hold. And then, as if things weren't bad enough, the Supreme Court dropped this bombshell, the Dred Scott decision. Wow, it wasn't just a setback, it was a judicial earthquake. It basically declared that African Americans had no rights as citizens, and maybe even more stunningly, that Congress had no power to ban slavery anywhere. For so many in the North, this was the moment they realized a peaceful political solution might actually be impossible. The House was now cracking at its very foundation. So who was the man destined to lead through this incredible crisis? Well, he didn't come from the political elite. He wasn't some East Coast aristocrat. He came from the American frontier. Lincoln's early life, it reads like the quintessential American story. You can see his whole journey right here. Born into poverty in a log cabin, largely self-educated, he works his way up, becomes a really respected lawyer, he marries into a prominent family, and he even serves a single term in Congress. It was a solid, respectable career for sure, but nothing yet suggested he was going to become a legend. This home in Springfield is so much more than just a house. It's a symbol of everything he had built for himself through sheer grit and intellect. It was from these very rooms that he would get the call to the presidency, a call that would mean leaving this quiet life and his privacy behind forever. But to really understand the man, you've got to look beyond the stoic icon on the $5 bill. This is where it gets really interesting. Lincoln carried these immense personal burdens. He suffered from what they called melancholy back then, what we'd now recognize as a crushing clinical depression that haunted him his whole life. He endured the unimaginable grief of losing 2 of his young sons. And get this, he's the only U.S. president to ever hold a patent for a device to lift boats over obstacles. These aren't just trivia points. They paint a picture of a complex, brilliant, and deeply human leader. So that Kansas-Nebraska Act, it pulled Lincoln right back into the political arena. He saw the potential spread of slavery not just as a policy debate, but as a deep moral and political threat to the nation's founding principles. And he decided he just couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. The 1858 Senate race in Illinois. This was the turning point. His debates with Stephen Douglas became a national spectacle, this incredible clash of 2 powerful visions for America's future. You can see it right here. Lincoln framed the expansion of slavery not just as a disagreement, but as a profound moral wrong. Douglas stuck to his idea of popular sovereignty. And here's the kicker. Lincoln actually lost the Senate race. But by winning the argument on a national stage, he won something way more valuable, a reputation that would lead him straight to the White House. This portrait captures such a pivotal moment. It was taken the day he delivered his Cooper Union speech in New York. The powerful East Coast elites, they came expecting to see a clumsy, backwoods lawyer. Instead, they were absolutely floored by his powerful intellect and his unshakable moral clarity. That one speech was a total triumph, and it transformed him from a regional politician into a serious contender for the presidency. In 1860, Lincoln won the presidency, but his victory was the final trigger for the very division he had warned about. He became president not of the United States, but of a nation that was actively disintegrating before his eyes. Just look at how fast the nation unraveled. It's breathtaking. In November, he wins the election, but without a single vote from the South. Okay, 1 month later, boom, South Carolina's gone, then the others follow. By his inauguration in March, he's practically begging for peace, telling the South, "We are not enemies but friends." But it's just too late. A month after that, Confederate cannons opened fire on Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun.
The war forced Lincoln to wield presidential power on a scale no one had ever seen before. He imposed a naval blockade, he spent money without asking Congress, and he took the extreme step of suspending habeas corpus. Now, that's a foundational right? It prevents the government from just imprisoning people without cause. These were controversial. Some even called them dictatorial moves, but in his mind, they were absolutely necessary measures for a desperate time.
And this quote right here, it gets to the very heart of his initial strategy. At the start of the war, Lincoln had one and only one paramount goal: save the Union. He famously wrote that if he could save the Union without freeing any slaves, he would do it. If he could save it by freeing all the slaves, he would do that. Everything else was secondary to just keeping the nation from falling apart.
But as the war dragged on, Lincoln's mission evolved, and this is where we really see his genius. The Emancipation Proclamation was a strategic masterstroke. On the one hand, yeah, it was a military tactic. It encouraged enslaved people to flee, which crippled the Confederate war economy. But on the other, it was a profound moral declaration that completely reframed the conflict. This was no longer just a war to preserve the old Union. It was now a revolutionary struggle to create a new Union, one truly founded on freedom. And right here, you can just feel his personal conviction. While his public justification had to evolve over time, his own moral certainty just shines through. He knew this was a pivotal moment, not just for the war, but for the history of human freedom itself. Then, standing on the blood-soaked ground of Gettysburg, Lincoln delivered what might just be the most powerful speech in American history. In just 272 words, think about that, it's just a little over 2 minutes. He gave meaning to all that horrific sacrifice. He redefined the war as a sacred test. Could a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal actually survive? He was rededicating the nation to its own founding ideals. After 4 brutal years, the war finally came to an end. Lincoln had succeeded in his paramount object. The Union was saved, but he would not get to lead the nation in peace. The end came in just a breathtaking rush. In a few short months, he's reelected, he secures the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolishes slavery forever, and then General Lee surrenders. The war is finally over. The Union is saved. And then, just 5 days later, at the absolute peak of this historic victory, he's assassinated. In an instant, the nation's greatest triumph became its deepest tragedy. So when you boil it all down, what is his ultimate legacy? Well, it's almost impossible to overstate. He held the nation together when it was tearing apart at the seams. He put the country on an irreversible path to ending slavery for good. And he powerfully redefined America's founding promise of equality for all. It's why, to this day, he is always remembered as one of the most consequential leaders in the nation's history.
And that leaves us with one of history's great what-ifs. With his vision of malice toward none, with charity for all, how might the incredibly difficult process of reuniting the country have been different under his leadership? It's a question that really reminds us just how much a single leader can shape the entire course of history.